Deception by Kellen Kimbrough. So I'm not going to read the entire thing right now. I'm just going to highlight a couple of points that are made in this piece that are going to be relevant to what we're going to get to in a few minutes. But the short of it is, buying power is nonsense. It has nothing to do with any real indicator of wealth or the economic condition of a community. It has everything to do with confusion and deception. And here, Kimbrough is pointing out, quite importantly, that one of the many areas of confusion that is created or exacerbated by this promotion of this mythology is the fact that even when you start to calculate the amount of black businesses or firms that exist, where in the economy do they exist? So first, white people still have 82% of all businesses in the United States. And I think for all that we focus on, and myself included, in terms of how many black businesses there are or have been created or what they're doing or not doing, or the financial literacy of their black consumer base, the reality is the more important part is that white people run 82% of the businesses. So similarly, as they talk about in terms of the types of firms, black people are not in the wealth producing areas of the economy. Black people are in primary care, mental health services, plumbing, heating. Oh, I'm sorry. They're not even saying that. They're saying that's where black people are not even the owners in primary mental health care services, plumbing, heating, air conditioning. Black-owned businesses, on the other hand, are concentrated in lower-income industries such as beauty salons, childcare services, assisted living services, cleaning services, barbershops, clothing boutiques. Although the sisters that are getting that check from me every month for my mother's assisted living, sometimes it's hard to imagine that it's the lower income industry, but it is, relatively speaking, of course it is. So same thing in terms of who gets the support, where the loans go to, what businesses are invested in. So this story, and I appreciate them using my work, it does a good job of reminding us who gets the money. And black people don't get a bulk of small business funding, investment, and again are targeting an incredibly poor sector of the community as their customer base. And then accurately, they make the point that, and this is something I'm going to come back to, that purchasing power is utilized as a bludgeon on a regular and persistent basis, drawing media attention and serving as a means of political organization like nowhere else. For us to engage in actual solutions, places where black politics are frequently debated and where black people's futures are given serious consideration, must eradicate these and other myths surrounding the American economy and black people's place in it. Supporting black businesses is easy and it requires little to no effort, but there is also, as they point out here, little to no return. And that's not because black people are not conscientious or not good business people, are not financially literate. It's because black people do not have any money or access to what is necessary to expand businesses and assets, et cetera, and to expand businesses and to capture more of the marketplace in whatever field or area they're in. So, okay, I appreciate that, and please check the link for the full story. I didn't give that last piece by Kimbrough its due credit, and even to a certain extent, if you're interested in even just checking my work on how these reports are put together and what they're ultimately trying to do, please do check the Nielsen report. The link is in the show description, and it's free. You do have to, I think, fill out some demographic information, but you know, and it's still free. So, okay. So before I get to the Baradaran, sort of the coup de grace, or as Fred Sanford used to say, the coup de grace. I mentioned this before. Shout out again to the Double O African community that put me in touch with this book, Black Nationalism in America, and co-edited by the late, great John Bracey. And a very short essay in here, which will do us a great deal of service, by, of all people, Ralph Bunche. And again, this is not somebody that we would have normally thought of in terms of radical politics. I mentioned this a few days ago, but I had a chance to really come back to it and look more carefully at what was being said here. And it's great. And this is something written, you know what? When exactly was this written? I don't think it says. But the essay is The New Negro Alliance. We must organize our purchasing power. The New Negro Alliance, quote, and then in quotes, we must organize our purchasing power. Yeah, let me see real quick if it's in the table of contents, because it's not on the essay itself. Where, and this is page 377, so we're over here. And from Ralph Bunche, The Programs, Ideologies, Tactics, and Achievements of Negro Betterment and Interracial Organizations, 1940. Okay, so it's older than I even thought. Okay, so it was 1940. Oh, it does say that, but I thought this was, okay, my bad. I thought this was a citation for something else at the bottom of the page. So from 1940, and there are just a couple of things in this essay that I wanted to just highlight. And it's an overview of the New Negro Alliance, which is just at the time a new formation of concerned Black citizens, starting, I believe, in Cleveland. No, this is in Washington, D.C. There was some other work similar happening in Cleveland, and who wanted to target and try to make use of what they thought of Black purchasing power and target businesses that weren't hiring Black people and supporting Black people, and having campaigns to again, boycott, to don't buy where you can't work. Those kinds of campaigns that we've talked about in previous videos, and even a little bit in my book around Abram Harris, who Baradaran put me onto, and Nathan Connolly put me onto, who was saying Black businesses have a vulturistic relationship to the community. So he just starts off this essay by going over who this New Negro Alliance is, what they've been trying to do, and then starts to look at what the pitfalls of their efforts are. And one of them is that there's an insufficient level of, as they put here, mass education as a necessary prerequisite to get the amounts of Black consumers organized to do whatever it is, boycott, whatever. So this is, again, something we've advocated all the time anyway. If any effort requires some sort of organized collective consciousness, and if you're building that organized collective consciousness, why not do so on the basis of more radical politics? But so Bunche is pointing that out. But then what Bunche also really, this is the point for me that is made in this chapter that is more important than anything, and something that I have not highlighted properly, if at all. Maybe I don't think I haven't highlighted at all, much less properly, which is that the two major critiques that Bunche points to in this essay about why the purchasing power effort doesn't work, aside from, they go through the economics of it and why, much like what I've been arguing, Abram Harris and others would argue, there's just no money. So this, E. Franklin Frazier, the circulation of that, it's not going to work because there's no money. So there's two major points that he said. One, he's saying it's a narrow nationalistic or racialistic, I think is the term he uses. It's narrow nationalism with the goal of only assisting black, white collar workers. It's to help them get a few jobs, because the ultimate effort of don't buy where you can't work and put your purchasing power where it has some political power, some impact on the economy. Uh, uh, all that they're looking for is to get a few black people some white collar jobs, or to replace white workers with black workers. So it's not about redistribution. It's not about improving the condition of workers or their relationship to the economy. It's just about switching some out. So he's saying here that it's narrowly nationalistic, that it only benefits a few black elite, and then it's anti-labor. These efforts around purchasing power and now he does note the contradiction, of course, and this is not this. So part of the problem, of course, is that black people keep finding ourselves in this trick bag of if we try not to be too narrowly nationalistic, there still is this white supremacy in even nominally liberal spaces. So unions, particularly at this time, we're not letting black people in. So you're on the one hand saying you want us to organize around unionize labor, organize labor, or the broader working class, but then you all are racist as well. But notwithstanding, I think that is still a very good point, if for no other reason, to better understand the economy. So it's not to say that whites should be given any pass. It is to say that we do have to recognize that replacing in the economy as it currently exists white workers for black workers is really not going to solve everything even for black people, because even within a white supremacist, white capitalist society, not all white workers have it good either. So that's, I think, a very important point that Bunch ends up making in this piece here. So as he says here, practically all of the jobs it has gotten for Negroes have been white collar jobs. That is, these efforts around don't buy where you can't work. And these are mainly clerks. It emphasizes the support of Negro businesses, that is the same call, support black businesses, and says very little about the importance of organized labor to the Negro worker. Though employing the tactics and weapons of labor, it is in no sense a labor organization. So he's talking about that New Negro Alliance. We could apply it more broadly speaking to all of these current existing efforts around buy black, bank black, and all this. They're not labor organizers. They're not looking to satisfy or solve the conditions of the worker. They're looking to get a few more black people a few more dollars, and mostly that will benefit a black elite or the black white collar worker. So as Bunch says, the philosophy of this movement is narrowly racial. If successful, it could only result in a vicious cycle of job displacement, since it creates no new jobs but only struggles to displace white workers. And since Negro communities do not offer sufficient economic activity to absorb even a small number of the Negroes now employed in white industry, right. And since Negroes do not offer sufficient economic activity to absorb even a small number of the Negroes now employed in the white industry, its appeal has been primarily in the interest of the Negro white-collar worker, and its support has come chiefly from the Negro middle class. So that's why the Maggie Andersons of the world, who I do wish well in her struggles with her health, but that's why she's happy to promote the business community legend of the civil rights struggle and come after little old us for being critical of her work, when the reality is the argument she's putting forth is anti-historical, as Bunch was arguing here in 1940, and we've shown, and we'll look at some more here in a moment. So it's just a few pages, this essay, but it's just looking at one example from 1940 as again. So when people tell me, as just happened the other day on Instagram, when people tell me that my arguments and my solutions and this, that are insufficient and we've tried that already. We've done all this radical stuff already. Let's do what we haven't done and start our businesses and get our money right, to get our politics right. They're showing here that we have tried that's the old version. And what I'm advocating, some radical movement left of that, is at minimum just picking up what others have been suppressed and trying to do by the most powerful state in the history of the world. All right. So here we go. Chapter 6. And what, oh man, so much I should have done with this. So again, better late than ever. I don't know. It's just a teeny bit irritating that. So, and it's so marked up too. The Decoy of Black Capitalism. Aptly named. I thought if anything, it could easily be subsumed within the Martin Kilson and the late Glenn Ford's argument around the Trojan horse, where white supremacy, white conservative politics use the Trojan horse of a black candidate to sneak all of the harmful and anti-black and damaging politics into the black community, into the black political discourse. The Decoy is doing the same thing. And basically what Baradaran is showing in this chapter, better and maybe in one space than I've ever seen, which is why it's just disappointing I didn't do more with this, is that consciously the notion of black capitalism, of which buying power, buying black, banking black, et cetera, are subsets, has been intentionally developed and imposed to neutralize, as one word, just right here in the first paragraph, neutralize black resistance. That's why I titled the video, "It's Over for Black Capitalism." And I just say the same thing I lovingly say in my classes. I dare you to produce the work that contradicts just what's in this chapter alone. Never mind the whole book, never mind my work or anybody else's, just this chapter alone. There is no reading this chapter unless you can debunk it, unless you feel like you can debunk it. There's no reading this chapter and coming back to any notion of black capitalism, black business, et cetera, and so forth is a solution. It has been specifically developed beyond what I've even been paying attention to as a tactic to suppress or neutralize black radicalism. As she points out here, again, on the very first page of the chapter, black capitalism as a phrase was developed as yet another rhetorical weapon to rationalize economic inequality. In other words, we've all been arguing, they have understood from day one, there is no catching up. So let's use this as a way to prevent radical organization and movements. Her first paragraph of the chapter, as the radical black movement gained momentum, it was met with a strong white backlash, which President Nixon rode into office. Faced with a political quagmire, the politically savvy Nixon was able to neutralize black resistance without sacrificing the Republican coalition built on the Southern strategy. Not only did Nixon find his way through the race minefield, he forged a path that many politicians after him would follow. The strategy included opposing all forms of legal race discrimination while rejecting any government effort at integration. The black militants would be met with law and order, and anti-poverty efforts were curtailed on the grounds that they were costly and created a dependence on the state. Nixon co-opted the Black Power movement's rhetoric of economic self-determination to push for a segregated Black economy, thereby justifying his neglect of other proposals for meaningful reform. Capitalism, specifically Black capitalism, became yet another rhetorical weapon used to rationalize economic inequality. To suburban whites, Black capitalism meant a cure to violence. Capitalism, entrepreneurship, and self-help struck a chord. Imagine that. Imagine that. We've seen it again with post-George Floyd, and there are so many parallels. Not only to the symbolic, posthumous reassassination of the brother by all the constant reference to him and his death outside of the context of what was going on, and then symbolically, as she ends up talking about historically with this chapter, just used again as a neoliberal symbol of the state's willingness to come in and support. But all the people, Black and all the allies out there marching and rallying and getting in the streets and all of that. No. You don't need to keep that same energy. We're just going to drop $50 billion on you from the corporate world for financial literacy courses and small business development. Because we know it's an antidote. It's been developed as an antidote to rebellion for at least 100 years. Because as they say here, as she says here, what Nixon was able to do was by using Black capitalism as a go-to, it placed the Black problem in the hands of Black entrepreneurs to fix with a little bit of federal aid, which of course he never gave. Black capitalism delegated the responsibility to solve the racial wealth gap to the Black community without the help of the white political establishment, who had always held power and the purse strings and who would continue to do so. I mean, it's the chapter, and I'm not even going to be doing it justice as I just read through my notes in it here. It's a perfect summary of almost all of the at least the dominant arguments as to why Black capitalism doesn't work. Starting with, again, the point that from the perspective of the ruling elite, it was meant to neutralize revolutionary activity. She describes it here as, in the words of a Nixon supporter, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, it was benign neglect. We're not gonna help you. We're not gonna attack you. We're just gonna leave you to do your thing, to Black capitalism your way to equality, knowing it'll never work. Because again, Black capitalism allowed Nixon to accomplish a great deal with very little. He neutralized Black militants, gained business support, lost none of his political base, and spent virtually nothing. So again, in the 21st century, no wonder, whether it's indirectly through an algorithm or directly through platforming and venture capital investment or support or whatever, of course, the white corporate political elite business community is more than happy to have Black people talk about business and getting our money together and circulating our dollars and buying Satoshis and tokenizing. Shout out to D Hollow on that one. Tokenizing our way. Oh, there's so much in here. But again, they're looking to respond to a context that she's describing here that involves Dr. King's assassination, the rising Black Power movement, more overt condemnation of capitalism and liberalism. She mentions in here something I didn't get a chance to it's a separate. I don't remember. She references an exchange between Eldridge Cleaver and Stokely Carmichael at the time, where Eldridge is accusing Stokely of accepting Black capitalism because there was this push within the Panthers under Huey to do that. And they would come back and reassess that later on, of course. But she's noting a moment where Eldridge is calling Stokely out, and I didn't remember that part. I didn't get a chance to check. I admit it's uncomfortable to read where at least one side of the argument. And maybe this is why Kwame Ture ended up leaving, or one of the reasons. I don't actually remember that. So I'll check the chat later, or we'll just come back to that point later. But the point that the real point for our purposes here is that oh, there go the thumbs. Is that Baradaran is noting a moment when the state is looking to find adequate responses to this rising radicalism, this threat of a rising radicalism. And one of the ways was to respond with this black capitalist ethic. The eventual 1968 Democratic candidate Hubert Humphrey called his proposal black entrepreneurship, so the Democrats had their version too. Need and opportunity for government help, which put forth a number of plans geared to enhance black pride and quell black insurgency. So again, they're telling us this is not about helping you, it's about quelling you and using the class antagonisms within your community as a mechanism, because that's what we've been doing in our community. It's been working so well in our community. Shout out to my to the AAPRP and our work study circle. We're in our chapter for gender epistemologies we were reading this week. What the chapter was talking about the impact of colonialism on the spatial arrangements of communities. And she was tracing how African women, which is her focus in this chapter, are the most negatively impacted by the colonization of space, the need to arrange communities to serve capital as opposed to themselves. So it becomes this all-encompassing reordering of society, all to satisfy the colonial rule. And anyway, I see it feels like something similar is been happening here as well with this. Will reorganize your definition of not only how you physically live, but how you define power and how you relate to the economy. We'll redefine all of that in a way that really mirrors white conservative arrangements, because that has been imposed on themselves in their own community. Now they're giving the black version meant to quell insurgency, as was the case in their community, and reorder not only the physical space, but the psychological space as well. By associating blacks with welfare dependency and embracing black enterprise, he, meaning Nixon, was able to cut economic aid to the ghetto and oppose integration in the guise of promoting black power. So the same thing is happening in the 21st century. You don't need political power. You don't need to focus on the $150 trillion in private personal wealth developed in this country alone last year that's in the hands of 1% of the population. Don't focus on any of that. In fact, we will cut federal services while encouraging your small business development. So that billions in post-George Floyd money isn't going to abolish debt and expand healthcare and pay for education. It's not going to do that. It's going to start businesses so you can get yourselves out of the hole. And then there will be this class element in the black community that will say, yeah, absolutely, let's do it, because they get their cut. She notes in here, and again, I gotta put the link to since it didn't get used the way I was hoping. I might as well have some use to it. To the 50th anniversary of Kerner, the Kerner Commission, the essay that I wrote that talks a little bit about this as well. But Baradaran points to that what Nixon was doing was a subtle subversion of the Kerner Commission's language, which called violence the harvest of racism. Now violence was the result of government aid, according to Nixon. Never mind that violence preceded poverty programs. Then the music became more upbeat, and the camera panned across images of construction sites, factory line, shipyard, and the candidate intoned, "We should enlist private enterprise to solve the problems of America." And what was interesting about the Kerner Commission was that it actually said, and one of the reasons why Johnson didn't even like the report, even though he had initially called for it, because for whatever the reasons, they gave some honest assessment saying that your poverty programs and stuff are insufficient. And they're going to, in the back end, cause more violence and hostility when Black people realize you've fed them a false line. So it's interesting. She's calling it the Black capitalism, that is Baradaran calling Black capitalism a subtle subversion of the Kerner Commission, because in a sense it is, but it's doing the same thing, because it's arguing those poverty programs aren't going to get it done. If you really want to quell violence, you need Black capitalism. And what the Kerner Commission was saying, no, you actually need real federal investment, not half-hearted programs. You need a real big deal here. So that's why Nixon started calling Black capitalism a hand up, not a hand out. And much like Jay-Z would later say about the NFL, in a speech called Human Dignity, Nixon said that the country needed to go beyond civil rights. We're beyond kneeling, as Jay-Z said. He said, in fact, forget civil rights. Go beyond civil rights. We cannot meet the needs of the late 60s with the solutions of the early 60s. We need to give Black people dignity, he was saying. On a radio program in April 1968, Nixon took his case directly to Blacks. He said that Black Americans do not want more government programs which perpetuate dependency. They don't want to be a colony in a nation. They want the pride, the self-respect, and the dignity that can only come if they have an equal chance to own their own homes, to own their own businesses, to be managers and executives as well as workers, to have a piece of the action in the exciting ventures of private enterprise. So this is again this is what she does again in this chapter a better job of giving this history than I've been giving. But the point that I've been making is very similar, in the sense that, again, buying power, Black power under Nixon, Black capitalism are all co-optations of militancy meant to negate militancy. So he's going to talk about the internal colonialism that we want to avoid, but that doesn't happen through political power and real left radical revolutionary struggle. It comes from having your own business. So this is why I keep saying, when people want to tell me that I'm advocating something old or something that won't work or has been proven not to work, it's the exact opposite. And the advocates of Black capitalism are literally taking white conservative supremacist capitalist colonizing rebranded language and making it do the work by putting it in the context of Blackness. Nixon sold his program as a companion to the Black Power movement. His plan was in sync with the true spirit of Black nationalism, he assured them. Quote, Black extremists are guaranteed headlines when they shout burn or get a gun, but much like the Black militant talk these days is actually in terms far closer to the doctrines of free enterprise than those of the welfare 30s. Nixon promised more black ownership, black pride, black jobs, black opportunity, and yes, black power in the constructive sense of that often misapplied term, end quote. So he's saying Teray is misapplying it. In today's language, Jared and us around here are misapplying the term of black power because we don't just mean start another business. In fact, we know that it can't mean that. And then when people, especially, and it's easy, I'm an easy target for this, but when people want to come, even sometimes around here, and they have that very tough talk of being in the streets and being this and being that, but the reality is, even unwittingly, they are carrying the whitest, most conservative, backwards message. So as Baradaran points out, Nixon was practically repeating Malcolm X, who said that the black man should be focusing his every effort toward building his own businesses and decent homes for himself. Although Nixon, and I would argue much of the black press and other black pundits today and black capitalists today, left out the part where Malcolm had said, show me a capitalist and I'll show you a bloodsucker. Nixon and his advisors intended black capitalism to be a total replacement for Johnson's anti-poverty programs. Why should the government spend anything? Even though the Kerner Commission was saying Johnson's programs were insufficient, King at the time, before his assassination, saw the first report from Kerner and said, this is insufficient. But even that's too much for the Nixon types and the black capitalist types. And then as Baradaran points out, black capitalism was a commercial success. Even the Democratic-leaning New York Times, which usually showed the same disdain for the president that is Nixon, that the president showed for it, endorsed black capitalism. What do you know? The whole right-left ruling elite said, you know what? This is really good. So this is why Nixon would condemn Kwame Ture's version of black power and replace it with black capitalism. And then 50 years later, Bill Clinton, the Democrat, would praise, as he eulogizes John Lewis, because John Lewis was much more friendly and easier to deal with than Kwame Ture. In other words, again, both sides of the aisle hated Kwame Ture. Both sides of the aisle promote black capitalism, but we still have folks today, understandably, given the context that I focus on in my work and we talk about here, of the messaging and the narrative and the propaganda, but the reality is they are the ones carrying a very old, backwards conservative logic. And what's interesting here is that, and this would be something interesting to do some research on. What are the specifics in terms of the shifts of the politics of certain elements of the black press? Because today, much of the black press, commercial press, promotes black capitalism, but Baradaran notes that the Chicago Defender at one point was, as she says, more cautious, noting that though the paper endorsed black capitalism, it expressed some suspicion over the candidate's motives, noting that, meaning Nixon's, noting that without actual capital, black power takes on the insignificant aspect of a paper tiger. You can't capitalism without capital. So even the Chicago Defender says we like it, but there's no capital. And that's the problem still to this day, despite the messaging. Republicans embrace black capitalism wholeheartedly. Nelson Rockefeller's strategist called the concept a stroke of political genius. And Rockefeller himself supported the idea. The National Review editor, William Buckley, praised the spirit of militant black leaders who have been preaching black initiative, black capitalism, and yes, black power. William Buckley. Again, that's like a smarter, more well-spoken Donald Trump saying, you know, I really like what you're doing. I really like what you're doing. You're on the right track. Black capitalism was a win. The government would not need to underwrite black businesses, just the community's hope in black businesses. It's like the economic version of Hoover saying, I don't need to have an agent in everybody's meeting. I just need to have everybody in the meeting thinking there's an agent in their meeting. And I'm just as effective. So here's the government. We don't need to actually underwrite the black businesses. And as I talk about a little bit in my book, and obviously more here in Baradaran's, they don't. Nixon doesn't kick in. And even the black capitalists who want to support the effort have to end up critiquing it because they're like, you didn't give us any capital. And without capital, you can't capitalism. It's kind of a fundamental point that keeps getting lost in all the mythologies in the spinning. Black capitalism was a win-win, according to the administration. Nixon's top aide, John Ehrlichman, explained with a relatively small budget impact this one program, which can put the administration in good light with the blacks without carrying a severe negative impact on the majority community, as is often the case with civil rights issues. So we don't lose our base. We shut down the militants, and the black capitalists and the black bourgeoisie get into high gear and start doing their things, scrambling for their pennies and telling the rest of their community to be quiet. The budget was small, as was the impact. In fact, there was more emphasis on black capitalism in Nixon's advertising and press response than there ever was in his White House policymaking. What do you know? What do you know? There was more messaging than there was actual business.
Message.
Literally.
Message.
And no capital. And then I love it. After this, Nixon expressed no interest whatsoever. And after they got the bill and he got elected and all of that, he expressed no interest whatsoever in black capitalism. They selected Tom Roser, a conservative business executive at Quaker Oats Company, to head the OMBE, which I talk a little bit about in my book, The Office of Minority Business Enterprise, that they promised that they would support black business, and then they didn't. And they hired the white Quaker Oats guy. Again, another scholar and writer of the time that Baradaran talks about says that he understood that black businesses were stuck outside of the systems of power, prohibited from entry by its white gatekeepers, who were the ones in possession of jobs, housing, and capital. So again, they understood. They've always understood. All the areas of the economy where wealth can actually be generated is hemmed up. They said that the most important objective was to create success stories, which would create pride among the minority, which in turn creates aspirations of those down the line, end quote. In other words, the program was to be symbolic. Quote, what the black people, the minority people need more than anything else today is a modern Horatio Alger, said Stan, one of the people in Nixon's group. This is the way we will build the pride of these people. It was clear that for Stans and Nixon's, black capitalism was no more than a public relations strategy. In other words, psychological warfare meant to negate black radicalism and militant political organization. The focus was in part due to the lack of funds to support large businesses, as well as the fact that the program was more about business myth-making and platitudes of racial pride than it was an outcome-oriented effort to help the black community accumulate business power. Again, that's why my work is titled Myth and Propaganda. It's not an economics book. It's not a study of economics proper, per se. It's meant to point this, to highlight this point, which is, again, why there's really no excuse for me not to have made more use of this chapter in my work, but that's the point. Small businesses were supposedly the lifeblood of entrepreneurship, and this may have been true at some point in time, but small businesses was no way to grow wealth in the 1970s, and it damn sure isn't by now. That's my addition. I didn't, she doesn't, her sentence ends at 1970s. I'm editorializing and saying it damn sure isn't now. As she points out, going back to the 70s, as Walmart was building its profitable empire, blacks were being told that to prosper, they should focus small and local, focus on small and local black businesses, which were already swimming upstream due to the deviant ghetto market. Were facing an even which were already swimming upstream due to the deviant ghetto market, were facing an even stronger economic current, pushing businesses to grow larger and more efficient. So again, as I point out in my book, that while Jay-Z's telling us he should have bought the property in Dumbo, it had already been bought up. And that's what she's saying here writ large. You already have Walmart coming in and taking over. You already have all these bigger conglomerates coming in and taking over. So, and meanwhile, you're saying, again, you're not even telling white people in a white supremacist capitalist society to start small businesses to compete with Walmart because they're the businesses getting wiped out by Walmart. You're telling black people to start small businesses to compete with Walmart when it's known from jump that that's not a solution. And that's why I love that the very first paragraph of this chapter is her saying black capitalism is meant to negate black radicalism. She talks about all of this requiring voluntary action of corporations to support this small business or this one. There's no policy, there's no demand, there's no law. This is not something that's being driven by a radical movement from below. This is being driven by a top-down movement meant to negate, suppress, neutralize black militancy. Now, here's the predecessor. Here's what I was mentioning earlier that would be the predecessor to what happened with George Floyd. In the 1970 Harvard Business Review, in 1970, the Harvard Business Review surveyed the top 500 industrial corporations and business leaders about their participation in black capitalism programs. It found that only a handful of business executives had made any financial contribution to black businesses. The executives believed that there was not enough financial incentive to participate. Because you're not going to, obviously they know you're not going to make any money investing in a business that targets poor black people. Most revealing in the survey was the report's finding that, quote, whatever may be said in public, it's clear from many private conversations that most of the existing efforts by white corporate executives to assist black businesses came about as a result of fear engendered by the ghetto riots, threats and pressures from militants, and to some extent pressure of influence from government officials. So they only got involved at all to suppress rebellion. Just like post-George Floyd, all that money was not flooded towards black people to end oppression. It was flooded to quell any potential rebelliousness. You about to blow? We got a nonprofit that's now well-funded to incorporate that anger and that potential explosion. And it's 50 plus years old already. If there was no fast returns for corporations for the black community, Nixon did reap a fast and instant result from black capitalism. The biggest win for his administration was that black capitalism turned out to be a very effective antidote to militant black uprisings. Nixon and his FBI targeted the Black Panthers as enemies of the state. The Black Panther Party, without question, represents the greatest threat to the internal security of this country, said J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover had sent FBI agents to infiltrate the Panthers' ranks and subvert their organizations. Panthers were imprisoned, harassed, and even killed by the administration in showdown after showdown. However, the Panthers were killed not by force, but by a slow drying up of funds and supporters due to both a change in the environment and to a subtle subversion of their cause by President Nixon. First, the Vietnam War abated and the draft diminished, so they lost support from white student protesters who no longer had a shared colonizer to fight. The other, which is because white liberals don't recognize themselves as colonizers and black people here as an internal colony of a colonizing empire. The other base of their support was a large part of the black community, the moderates. The group was neutralized by superficial concessions from the administration. The concessions were black capitalism and affirmative action. Black capitalism was just a continuation of black exploitation, according to Eldridge Cleaver. He said that Carmichael had surrendered black power to the Nixon administration to be corrupted by into black capitalism. That's a struggle for me to read. I'd have to get more into where she got that and what the context was and what, you know. But the point being, right or wrong, even if our biased and beloved heroes are wrong at a given point, that is still the point. The point is, black capitalism was never meant to be anything other than a neutralizing agent. The theory behind developing a separate black economy had been that economic power would lead to political power. But perhaps they had it backwards.
Message.
Does this not ring a bell for all of the arguments that I'm literally having on Instagram right now? The theory behind developing a separate black economy had been that economic power would lead to political power, but perhaps they had it backwards. Because what she's showing in this chapter, and again, I'm not doing it justice, but what she's showing in this chapter is that not only the intent behind the messaging of black capitalism, but that she's showing that it's political power that is ultimately the determinant of everything we're talking about. Political power determines what money is, how it's developed, how it's defined, where it's distributed, what its value is. If the rollout of black capitalism, if the rollout of the black capitalism program had demonstrated anything, it was that economic power could not be achieved without government help. American businesses, banks, and homeowners had all benefited from being inside the power structure and receiving its bounty. Blacks had been on the outside, and their lack of political control translated into a lack of economic power. Until black people could access the levers of political power, they could not unleash government or business support, both of which were essential for economic success. In fact, the only reason government or business had contributed anything at all to growing black businesses had been as a reaction to the threat of violence that the Panthers and militants had created.
Message.
The initial Black Panther movement had held a modicum of power, even if it was weak, even if it was a weak and artificial power derived from fear. But this fear was the reason the business community and the federal government had focused on black ownership in the first place. The black capitalism program and its reliance on the white power structure removed this source of power. It also derived the black community of another important source of power derived from collective action.
Message.
And
now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
And this is what I was mentioning the other day, that she really, I'm just so frustrated in myself. On page 191, this is where Baradaran really breaks down what all of this is, and something that I mentioned the other day, and a little bit of what Bunch was mentioning earlier in this discussion today. By dividing the community between the entrepreneurs and the masses of consumers, the black community was placed at cross purposes. By linking large white corporations with aspiring black businessmen, by linking large white corporations with aspiring black businessmen, the race cohesion that Rage the Panthers had channeled and amplified was dissipated. Beyond all their rhetoric, look at what we do on EYL each week. Look at what I've been doing on my show for a while. Look at what happens on this platform in a variety of ways. So much of what is described initially as some black radical business effort is connected to is really a funnel to white money, to white corporations, white banks, white political interests. So that's the one thing. The other thing, as she says towards the end of that same paragraph, the war on poverty, which was designed to help the poor of all races, was instead being diverted to help aspiring black entrepreneurs, isolating the black community from yet another source of strength, the interracial collective action of the poor. So it's the same argument that Bunch was making. Now I get it. It's not like unions and the labor movement has been this bastion of unity. But the reality is, especially by today, it's a far more hopeful outlet than siding with the white corporate business and political elite. I failed. So in other words, because yes, there was has always been racism in unions, that even in 2024, it makes more sense to suggest that there's less racism on Wall Street or less racism in the investment community. That doesn't make sense. Either way, analytically, it still makes the point that all of this stuff about black businesses and buying power and all of that is a narrow nationalist effort that's meant to benefit only a black conservative ruling elite, a black bourgeoisie, and it cuts black people off analytically, interpretively, and organizationally from broader movements where solidarity may in fact be warranted and most beneficial. An expert in political detente, Nixon used black capitalism to let out just enough steam from the pent-up pressure cooker of rage in the poverty-stricken ghetto to squelch the brewing revolution. She calls it checkmate. It was vague enough to cool stuff off and vague enough to take the sting out of black radicals' demand for black power, jettisoned Johnson's anti-poverty program, maintained his opposition to integration, and even won support of many black leaders. Checkmate. And we see it happening again. To the extent that black leaders today are being promised this fake black capitalist fantasy through Trump and the Republicans. She also shows how in 1 year, so Dr. King is killed in 1968. Jesse Jackson literally soaks himself in King's blood and assumes the mantle of the leadership of that movement. And then, as Baradaran notes, Jackson went from a forthright denunciation of black capitalism in 1969 to being its champion just a year later. In 1969, he called black capitalism a divisive force in the black community, which should be seeking total economic development of the black community instead of a few additional entrepreneurs, end quote. He said that attaching the name black to capitalism is not a description, but a diversion, end quote. By 1970, he advertised his Black Expo as an annual trade fair for black business, both local and national, as well as a generational celebration of black capitalism. I wonder what could have happened in that year. Now, don't tell Diallo this part, but I do kind of lightly mention it in my own work. But even the Nation of Islam, black nationalists who had a long-standing policy of staying out of politics, endorsed Nixon's Black Capitalism program in the April 1970 issue of Muhammad Speaks. I did try to find a digital copy of that, and but that issue was not available through others around it were. But I didn't see that specific issue, but it makes sense that would have been correct. And then she makes another great point in this chapter about what we get in terms of media. Established black periodicals like Ebony and Jet, of course, John H. Johnson, feature black business section highlighting black business success stories. One of the most popular 1970s television shows, The Jeffersons, featured George Jefferson's success and struggles as a dry cleaning tycoon in Harlem and opened with the theme song, We're Moving On Up. But everybody knew, from Robert Allen, who she talks about, Ralph Abernathy, Manning Marable, called black business snake oil and black businessmen the linchpin of underdevelopment and capital accumulation within the black community. He denounced black leaders, Jesse Jackson in particular, for convincing the black community to move from civil rights to silver rights and from aid to trade. And then, of course, Earl O'Farrill had produced The Myth of Black Capitalism, which was just reissued again, in which he concludes in the introduction that it is still a myth. Just a little bit more here. Again, she talks about, that is, Baradaran talks about Andrew Brimmer, who she says provided the sharpest critique of black capitalism and black banking. Brimmer forcefully denounced black capitalism, maintaining, quote, the only really promising path to equal opportunity for Negroes in business, as in other aspects of economic activity, lies in full participation of an integrated national economy. It cannot be found in the backwater of separation and segregation. He called black capitalism, quote, a cruel hoax, and, quote, one of the worst digressions that has attracted attention and pulled substantial numbers of people off course, end quote. It cannot work because the black business market simply did not have enough wealth or income to support a viable industry. Again, this is where I'm getting it. This is where I'm getting all of my arguments from. At least the framing, and then you can fill it in with the updating of the information. Black people do not have access to the wealth producing capability that is to what you need to produce wealth, to capture markets, etc. Most white businesses don't either, by the way. So Brimmer goes on. He took his argument directly to the black community in an Ebony essay in 1970. Now, there's a contradiction. At least John H. Johnson would allow this critique to appear in his publications, but he denounced black capitalism as, quote, a mirage of the black community. It's right, a mirage of the black community operating as a separate nation. Another economist, Robert Brown, explained, there's no question of pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps. We have no bootstraps. And that's not how wealth is created. That's also part of it, referring to black businesses as ornaments, that they would never become vital instruments of economic development. How black banks can't even satisfy the interest demands of black deposits. So then Baradaran does sort of, as she concludes this chapter, she does so sort of in the trajectory that I was going in, and that I'm most focused in my little bit of work here. She says, however, this demand for economic redress by the black movement came at the same moment that capitalism itself seemed under siege by revolutionary communist regimes abroad. In the fog of domestic and foreign war and in the existential Cold War, it was hard to draw lines. So all this development of the mythology, buying power, black capitalism, is all occurring in the context of the United States trying to solidify itself as the singular dominant power in the world after the Second World War, and using propaganda, psychological warfare, and the promise of U.S.-style democracy and capitalism as the pathway for the world to follow. She talks about the rise of Alan Greenspan, who some of us will remember as the Fed chair. He started his career under Nixon and basically followed the same, let's help the Negroes help themselves. They don't need civil rights leaders. They need more moderate, old line Negro civil rights leaders, he said. This can be done by, in other words, we don't need that, is what he was saying. We need black capitalism, and advised Nixon to pursue programs that would help Negroes help themselves. She mentions the Chicago School of Economics and the neoliberalism that comes out of that, where Milton Friedman and others come from. The neoliberal faith in capitalism and market efficiency was rooted in an ideal much like the egalitarian principles of the founding documents. So this is, again, what I've been arguing. We have black-faced neoliberal politics being promoted to black people all the time now. And the point that Baradaran is pointing to here is that this mythology arrives at a post-Second World War moment where the two competing fears of black... yeah, they should be celebrated. The two competing fears of black liberation and communism were the trajectories that were the dominant threats that all of this messaging was meant to rebut. And that's ultimately how she concludes the chapter, and how I would want to conclude my thoughts on this as well. The goal is to even the point of calling this, to borrow from her title, the decoy of black capitalism, the goal of the decoy is still to support the white hunter and the white hunt itself. You put the decoy out there to trick the prey into becoming dinner. And that's what's happening to black people. You have black people playing the hunter in this case, or really white people throw the decoy of black entrepreneurs out there into the lake and wait for us to come flock around, and then we all get shot up and dragged off by white capital to feed their system. So again, big shout out to Relax and Take Notes, who reminded me of chapter 6 in this book. We also went over the short chapter on purchasing power in this book, Black Nationalism in America, and the links to the other stories that I referenced, and one from Hood Communist, are in the show description as well. And that's it. Little over an hour. All right. Are there any questions, comments? Anybody got anything? You can put it back to recycle it to the top, and I'll try to address it quickly. Otherwise, thank you all for coming through. Please do like, share, subscribe. Please do check the information scrolling beneath me and support Daruba if at all possible, materially. I'll settle for a like and a comment and a share and a subscription. But if you have any resource capability to support Daruba as he continues to need to pay out of pocket for this medical treatment, which is just bananas, please do send what you can. And I hope that this video helps as we all try to navigate these mean media streets and all this horrific mythology. And thanks to Mehrsa Baradaran for that great chapter. I didn't even do it justice, but it makes clear that this black capitalism thing is not real. It's never meant to be real. Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. Yeah, Keisha Bentley Edwards, her interview was great as well when I was doing the Kerner Commission stuff. Yeah. I should do live call-ins. I mean, do you want to call in now? Are you saying you want me to put the link in the chat now? We used to do live call-ins when I did radio. That used to be kind of fun. Used to be kind of wild too. But thanks everybody for coming through. How do most white businesses stay afloat if they don't have the resources either? They don't. They don't. I mean, you know, when I started paying attention, I don't know, in the early 90s, I mean, I read a lot of stories since then about, I mean, just Walmart was brought up. Walmart has destroyed many small white businesses and has destroyed labor by undercutting the cost of labor, by paying people overseas even less. And they've dominated the entire supply chain, so small businesses in the area can't thrive. Target does the same thing. Right here in Howard County where I live, Columbia, Maryland did the same thing. When I was growing up, there were rules in place that were meant to stop big box stores and all of that kind of thing from being put here so that we would have smaller businesses, and then the mall, of course, to sort of, as the socialists intended when they developed the mall, to keep all of commerce in one area so that the rest of the space could be open and clean and free from all that commerce. But yeah, white businesses don't do well. I mean, Apple and you know, all the consolidation in media and Google and I mean, all of that, they're wiping out, you know, all white businesses want to do is what black businesses hope to do: get bought. Get bought. You know, and that's sort of my point. I mean, again, I keep joking, you know, I think it's funny to think of it this way, but the greatest, most well-known criticism of capitalism the world has ever seen came from two white European men, one of whom rich. Engels came from money. And they even were saying, even when the context is exclusively white, capitalism is a nightmare. So I always think that's funny. Sears is gone. Ain't no Sears around here. All of that, Hex, Woody's. I used to have all those stores out here. They're all gone. My small pharmacy got bought up by CVS. And I remember he told me he was happy. When I was a kid, his name was Doc. We used to go see the old Jewish pharmacist, and we called him Doc, and I would go there to get my comics and whatnot. And I remember the day he said he was selling, and he said, and he even told us, it was me and a couple kids in the store, and he said, the money's too good. I was like, what's CVS? I don't know what a CVS is. And the little old guy that we had a little bit of I'm sure it was paternal and not as friendly as I remember, but it was like like we knew the guy. You could say what's up to the guy. That's gone. And now it's all, so yeah. I mean, so that's why it's so whack that black people get told to do the black capitalist thing. It's like, but whites didn't even do it. How is it the whole system not collapsed? I don't know. I don't know yet. I think a lot of it has to do with messaging. Dr. Ball, where can people get your book? Diallo's #1 fan. Really? Diallo's #1 fan, was it? No, I appreciate you. Anywhere you get books, anywhere you order books, you can likely get it. The link to the publisher's website is at my website at imixwhatilike.org. You can get it there. The digital version of the first edition is still free. You can get that. Although the second edition has some nice updates to it. So, you know, but yeah. All right, good people. Just wanted to really address that. I had a really good time doing that. Thank you all for coming through. Please do, again, like, share, subscribe, support the platform however you think you can. Please support Daruba however you think you can as well. And come on back in a couple hours for Sundays with the Ear Doctor. And then make sure you have the bell rung so everything coming later on this week and whenever else you will be aware of. I know I'll be back for Tuesday. We are interviewing the filmmakers of Four Died Trying, about King, Malcolm, and the Kennedys. So that should be interesting. But of course, the remix comes back Tuesday morning as well. So, all right, good people. Thanks again. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. And I'll catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like. Thanks again, everybody. Peace.
And what do you sacrifice?
Calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago for which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, that set me on a path from which there's no escape. I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I look down, there's no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see. Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice?
Everything, 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 everything.